Hi, I'm Mr. McMillan, and welcome to part 4 of this series on the problem of evil. This part will examine the free will defence. Just a quick reminder, in case you haven't watched these videos in order, but a theodicy is an attempt to show how the existence of evil and suffering is compatible with the existence of an all-loving, all-powerful God. Both the Augustinian and Irenaean Theodicies were overtly Christian in nature, and so may not satisfy those theists who are not Christians. While both the Augustinian and Irenaean Theodicies include a place for the role of free will, in recent years a number of philosophers have developed the idea of free will into a theodicy all of its own. Rather unimaginatively, it's simply referred to as the free will defence. Instead of starting with a specific religious text, such as Genesis, the free will defence begins with the claim that God created human beings with the intention that they would be able to discover and know Him, and in some sense have a relationship of love, faithfulness or obedience to Him. However, different religions may express this in different ways. A prerequisite of this situation is that human beings must be genuinely free to respond to God in whichever way they choose, and therefore it's essential that they have genuine free will. The necessary consequence of a world with free will is that it will include the existence of both good and evil. Furthermore, in order for this free will to be genuine, God must not place limits on it or intervene arbitrarily. If God was to intervene every time that someone was about to do something genuinely evil, then this would tie our hands and restrict our freedom. Richard Swinburne, a key proponent of the free will defence, said, "The less God allows men to bring about large-scale horrors, the less the freedom and responsibility He gives them." In other words, in order for humans to be able to show the virtues that God desires, such as courage, fairness and mercy, then humans must be able to be equally cowardly, unfair or cruel. We might assume that the free will defence is only effective in explaining moral evil, but Swinburne believes it provides an explanation for natural evil too. He argues that a world in which death is a part of nature is a world better designed to bring about God's purposes. Swinburne gives a number of reasons why a world with death is better than one without it. Firstly, a world without death is a world where a person cannot make the ultimate self-sacrifice. Secondly, having a limited lifespan focuses a person's attention on how they should live. As Swinburne says, a situation of temptation with infinite chances is no situation of temptation at all. If there is always another chance, there is no risk. In other words, we need to know that we will not have infinite chances to get things right in order to motivate us to at least try. Thirdly, a world without death would mean the young would always be dominated by the old. Younger generations would never have the chance to take their place in having responsibility. Fourthly, death limits the amount of suffering one can experience or have inflicted on them. A common criticism of theodicies is how could God allow so much suffering? Some supporters of the free will defence seek to show that it is not possible to question the amount of suffering. Swinburne says that when we ask God to create a world with less suffering, we are in fact asking that God should make a toy world, a world where things matter but not very much. He would be like an overprotective parent who will not let his child out of sight for a moment. Furthermore, as John Hick has argued, if we say some evils are too much, then we get into a relative debate about where do we draw the line as to what is too much suffering. For example, if we lived in a universe where the worst possible pain we could cause was to flick someone's ear, then in this world we would consider those who do such a thing as intolerable monsters, akin to the way we view mass murderers such as Adolf Hitler. This seems absurd to us in this universe, but highlights that our understanding of suffering is only relative to our own experience. So what, if anything, is wrong with the free will defence? Some of the criticisms levelled at the Augustinian and Irenaean theodicies are applicable to the free will defence, and you could use those in the exam. For example, the question of whether it is acceptable to achieve something good by doing something bad is as relevant to the free will defence as it was to the Irenaean Theodicy. However, the biggest criticism of the free will defence was offered by the Australian philosopher John Mackie. The free will defence claims that when creating the world, God faced a simple choice. Either he could create a world where humans had no free will, but in which pleasure is maximised and pain minimised, but where humans would effectively be robots. Or he could create a world where human freedom was the most important thing, although he would know that this would result in some pain and suffering, but this was a price worth paying so that it could lead to genuine response to God. This is the choice that Swinburne believes God would take. Mackie asserts that God had a third, and ultimately better, option available to him. In Mackie's view, God, if he was truly omnipotent, could have the best of both worlds, genuine freedom and the minimisation of pain. Mackie believes that a truly all-powerful God could have created humans who are genuinely free, but happened to always choose to do the right thing. I don't know why, but in my head, Mackie's superhumans somehow look like cyborgs. If God can make someone who chooses to do the right thing on at least one occasion whilst they are still free to do so, then it is not logically impossible to create humans who just happen to do this every time. Mackie says, God was not then faced with a choice between making innocent automata and making beings who, in acting freely, would sometimes go wrong. There was open to him the obviously better possibility of making beings who act freely but always go right. Clearly his failure to avail himself of this possibility is inconsistent with his being omnipotent and wholly good. Supporters of the free will defence would argue that what Mackie is claiming is logically impossible. Beings who always do good would not be truly free, and therefore this is not possible for God to do. Not because God can't do it, but because it can't be done. It is like asking God to create a stone too heavy for himself to lift. It creates a logical paradox. Thanks for watching. That's the end of this part of my series on the problem of evil. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, and download the podcast from iTunes.